Welcome to VCF Automation 9 video series. My name is Mahar Al-Asfar and I am a product marketing engineer within the VMware Cloud Foundation division at Broadcom. This is part 2, VCF Automation 9 provider organization setup of this video series, and we'll start by touching on the VCF 9 infrastructure setup again that we discussed in part 1 and will continue to work with for the duration of the series, and also explained the organization tenant design plan we have in mind that we want to implement. We'll talk about the different supported organization type, such as the organization for all apps and the organization for VM apps, and including the provider consumption org. In terms of organization setup, we'll demo it first using the Quickstart, which is a simple automated setup. Then we will reset everything and then demo it using the manual setup, which what we recommend in production. This is where we touch on going through the guided steps and creating regions, creating organization, the option of enabling and using the provider consumption org, enabling the VM apps organization, and also creating the IP spaces and the provider gateway for networking, and allocating regional quota at the end and network configuration to the organization. At the end, we finalize and test our organization. This will be a long one, so let's get started and dive right in. The VCF 9 instance that we are using for the demo consists of one management workload domain and one virtual infrastructure workload domain. Both domains have dedicated vCenters and NSX managers. The edge clusters are also deployed and configured with Border Gateway Protocol (PGP) to enable dynamic routing in both domains. We have one supervisor deployed in each of the domains. These supervisors are configured with VCF networking with VPCs as the networking stack. The supervisor also are configured with dedicated external IP blocks that does not overlap. Across the two domains and on top, we have VCF automation. VCF automation will be configured with two regions. The US West region will contain the supervisor in the management domain, and the US East region will contain the supervisor in the VI workload domain. Within VCF automation, we will have an all apps org called Acme configured with two region quota, one region quota from the US West and one region quota from US East. The all apps organization Acme going to be configured with a dedicated external IP blocks, so it doesn't overlap with the other two external IP blocks for the supervisors. In terms of the organization types, we'll start with the organization for all apps. This is used to run a wide variety of applications, including virtual machines, Kubernetes, data services, to create and manage traditional and modern cloud native. A supervisor must be enabled in vSphere and configured with VCF networking with VPC. This organization is then used to create projects with namespaces that features secure infrastructure isolation, resource quotas, and out-of-the-box infrastructure services. The organization for all apps is the default experience in VCF Automation 9. The second organization type is the organization for VM apps. This is used to support VM-based applications powered by vSphere clusters. Existing VMware ARIA automation customers can use this organization after the upgrade to continue leveraging ARIA automation capabilities as they do today without disruption. They can provision VM-based applications via catalogs and apply policies as well. One organization for VM apps is allowed via the UI, and you can create more via the APIs. The organization for VM apps is disabled by default. For this demo, I'm already logged into the VCF Automation Provider Management Portal as the provider administrator. We see the Welcome to VCF Automation page since we don't have any organization created as of yet. We also see the two workflows to get started, the quick start and the manual setup. The quick start, which we will demo now, is going to allow us to create a fully functional tenant organization along with the required resources. We recommend using this option only if you're either setting up a single tenant or if you're just exploring and testing the VCF automation capabilities. So let's go ahead and click on Get Started. That will take us to the Quick Start workflow. And for step 1, we need to provide an organization name. We're going to just use demo for now, since this is not the end result we want based on the design plan that I shared before. We'll click Next and move on to the Allocate Infrastructure Capacity step. This is where we provide a region name. So we can use the same region name we decided to use in the design plan. A region here consists of one or more supervisors and provides the organization we are creating with a collection of resources: compute, memory, storage, and networking. We said in the design that the region US West should contain the supervisor from the workload domain, so we can select that from the list. Pressing Next, we move on to selecting storage classes. These are the storage profile discovered in the vCenter. I already have a storage profile used by the supervisor. I'm going to use the same storage profile as the storage class here, which maps to the vSAN backend storage. In the final step in Review and Complete, this is just going to tell us that we're creating a demo organization with a default project. We're going to be creating a US West region that's going to be assigned to the org demo. And also we'll be assigning the storage class to the organization demo. And under networking, we're saying here that the external connectivity will be established using the networking parameters defined on the supervisor. So if the supervisor is configured with an external IP block, we will be using that IP block as the IP space allocated to this organization. Users assigned to this organization can get started right away. So this is not something that we're doing. You are, as a provider admin, will need to create the first user, and then the org admin will need to define and configure identity providers later on and import the users from those identity providers. But for now, to create our organization and to configure it, we'll click on Create and Provision Organization. The quick start workflow succeeded, and we can see the start and the completion time. So it took about a minute or so. So we'll click OK and let's go and see what happened here. After clicking OK, we're taken to the infrastructure overview, and we can see that all the steps in the getting started are now checked. So the automated setup went through these steps and configured the region, created the org, created the IP space, created the provider gateway, and assigned the regional networking to the organization. Let's go ahead and actually check first on the organization. We can see that the organization demo was created. So if we click on demo, we can see that the region quota of 1 has been configured and the region network configuration 1 has been configured for the existing region that we've created. If we click on the region quota, we can see that region US West has been allocated to the demo organization, and it used some capacity from the overall capacity. So we didn't really have a way of defining how much CPU limits and memory limits and maybe reservations we want to allocate for this demo. You would have to do that as a day 2 action after the organization has been created and configured, so we can go back and edit the zone and update these values. Same thing applies to the VM classes or t-shirt sizing. Looks like we've selected all 16 VM classes. So if you wanted to be explicit and select one or more, maybe large, small, and medium only, you would have to do this as a day 2 actions and edit the VM classes and then uncheck any of the VM classes that you do not want to make available to the demo organization that the quick start workflow created for us. If we scroll down to the storage class, it's the same story. I mean, we've assigned the storage policy we want, but we've gave them limits to the entire capacity of storage. Obviously, when I'm creating one or more organization, I want to give them a subset of the storage available, not the entire thing. So again, this is one of the pros and cons of using the quick start workflow. If we go in on the networking, we can see that the networking, regional networking has been configured. We have a demo as for the log name. This is used for logs. And then in the US West region, we see that we have a provider gateway that was created and assigned here. And we have default VPC connectivity profile with everything unlimited, including the IP usage, where it has unlimited IP quotas and unlimited CIDRs quota as well. If we go to the first user, we see that the first user has not been configured. So if you want to hand the keys to the organization admin and give him the first built-in administrator, you would have to do that also as a day 2 action. Finally, if we go to networking, of course, we can see the provider gateway that was created and the IP space that was created. And this is the IP block that was discovered and used by the supervisor. And we're currently using this as the IP space. So if you plan to use a dedicated IP block, again, you would have to edit the IP space here and then go to the IP block and external reachability, remove the discovered subnet and put your own dedicated IP space that you want to allocate explicitly to the demo organization that we just created. The region, of course, the workflow created the US West region for us, and it contains the supervisor in the management domain, exactly like we wanted it. So we will reset things and continue with the presentation. Now we will demo the manual setup, which what we recommend doing in production. The manual setup workflow will manually create a fully functional tenant organization step by step. And we recommend using this option in production because it offers more control over parameters used to create the tenant organization. So let's go ahead and click on Get Started, which takes us to the infrastructure overview. And we can see all the getting started steps that we have to go through, starting with creating a region, then moving on to creating an organization, creating an IP space, creating provider gateway, and then finally region network setting when we allocate those regional network and setting to an organization. If we remember the design plan, we need to create 2 regions, US West and US East. So let's go ahead and click on Start. That should take us right into the region menu and into the workflow. So the first region I want to create is US West. We mentioned that in US West, we need to make sure that we include the supervisor in the management domain. And to do that, we have to select the NSX local manager first for the management domain. And once I select the NSX local manager, I can see the supervisor that is configured to talk to the NSX manager. You can only include 1 or more supervisor in a region if they talk to a common NSX instance. So let's go ahead and select our supervisor. Next, we need to select the storage classes that we want to make available in the region. So I already have a storage profile that we're going to be using as the storage class. This is the same storage profile or policy that the supervisor is configured to use, which going to map this to the vSAN backend storage. Of course, we can select 1 or more storage classes. If you have multiple storage tiers that you want to select and make available to the region and then later to the organization or the tenant, this is your opportunity to select them all. I only want the vSAN backed storage, so therefore I've selected the storage policy representing that storage type. Once we click Submit, this is going to create our US West region. I can always go in and expand the recent task at the bottom of the page to see the progress of the creation region workflow. Looks like it was succeeded, and I can collapse the recent tasks and move on to create my second region. The second region was US East. So US East is supposed to contain the supervisor in the VI workload domain. Therefore, I'm going to select the NSX local manager of the workload domain. This will actually show us the supervisor that is talking to the NSX local manager in the workload domain, and that's the workload domain supervisor. Next, I'm going to go to the storage class. Same thing. I have the same storage profile named exactly the same. in the vCenter managing the workload domain. This is the same storage profile or policy or class that the supervisor is using, and it's mapped to the vSAN backend storage. Click Submit to create the second region. Now that we have the two regions we are planning to use, if we go back to the infrastructure overview and look at our getting started workflow, we can see that the creation of the region workflow step, it's green checked and it has this green border around it. Next, we have the create organization. We have to create an organization. This is a top level entity, as it says here, used to group and manage resources and map those resources to users, policies, IaaS services, etc. So let's go ahead and create an organization. Now, there's one thing here I want to show you is that if you click start, and since the all apps organization is the default experience, you will not get an option to select what type of organization you're going to create. It'll always default to the organization for all apps. I'm going to show you here how we can enable the VM apps organization. So we're gonna back here a little bit and go down to the feature flags. And in the feature flags, we're going to go to the second one where it says classic tenant creation, and we're gonna enable this option. Now, if we go back to the organization and click on the create organization, we're presented with selecting the organization type. So the workflow is asking us if we want an all apps type organization or a VM apps type organization. The all apps organization will be for all apps, as the name suggests, and will be based on the supervisor and the supervisor services in vSphere. On the other hand, the VM app will not require to have a supervisor and will be using the vSphere clusters instead to support deploying VM-based application. This is also the same organization type that existing ARIA automation customers will be placed in after the upgrade, so they can continue using ARIA automation without disruption. Now, we're not going to go through this organization type. What we're going to do is we're going to also back and show you another, or the third type of organization that is disabled by default. So if we go to the feature flags again, we can see the provider consumption org and with a state disabled. So we're going to go and actually enable this. This is an all app type organization specifically used by the provider and for the provider, but also it adds additional features such as sharing workflows and catalog items with other organization. Acme in our design plan is the provider. And later on in the video series, we'll see that we're creating a second organization as a line of business for the Acme organization. So I really want to use the provider consumption org because also we are able to use the embedded orchestrator within the provider consumption org. So if we now click on the organization, we see the provider consumption org, but of course I want to name this as Acme based on my design plan. So to do that, I can click into the display name, and I have to disable first the organization to be able to rename it. So we can go in on the overview menu, click edit, and then rename the provider consumption org to Acme. This is a unique identifier that will be used in the full URL, which users would use to log in into this organization. We will also call this Acme, and here in the description, we will keep the mention of that this is a provider consumption org, which was disabled by default, and we just simply enabled it. Now that we renamed the organization based on the desired design plan that we shared before, I can enable my organization and continue with its configuration. So real quickly here, if we click on organization, we have our organization. And if we go back to the infrastructure overview, we see this orange box now instead of green or gray. This indicates that the organization exists, but it's not fully configured. So what we need to do is we need to go to the organization and configure both the region quota. So if we click on Acme, we can see that we have 0 region quota and 0 region network configuration. So the first thing we want to do is assign Acme region quotas from both US West and US East. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll first select the US West, and we know in the US West we have the supervisor in the management domain. So we can see that, and we will select that and then click on add. We need to add at least one zone to give this organization access to infrastructure resources. Usually supervisors can be deployed on one or more zones. So we need to add one zone. This supervisor in both domains is configured with one zone, given that this is just a lab. So I'm going to select my zone here, and based on my design plan, I'm going to give this 50 gigahertz of CPU and 256 gig of RAM, and I'm going to leave the CPU reservation 0 for now and click save. Once we click save, we see the configured CPU limits and memory limits, including reservation, set to 0. And now click on assign and continue to move on to step 2 and to assign the VM class and the storage class. So now we see all the VM classes that was available in the region US West, and here we have the option and the opportunity to select what we want to make available to the Acme organization in the US West region. So I'm gonna just select large, medium, go to the next page, select small and extra small for all best effort. Now, if you want to use the guaranteed VM classes, which include reservation for CPU and memory, you need to remember that when you add zone 1, you need to also define reservations when you're configuring and adding the zone, as we did in the previous setting. So right now we're going to go without using the reservation and move on to using the storage class. Here again, this is the storage class available within the US West region, and I'm going to select terabyte. And if we hover over the storage consumption, we can see we have a total of 44 terabyte. Obviously, I don't want to give the organization the entire storage capacity, so I'm going to only give them, as my design plan said, I'm going to give them 2 terabyte in the US West region. Once I'm ready, I'm going to assign and continue, and this is going to finish the first region quota of our Acme org, and then we're going to repeat the same thing and doing it for US East. So here now I'm going to use US East, which going to show me the supervisor in the VI workload domain, and I'm going to do the same thing. This supervisor is configured with one zone, and I'm going to give it 50 gigahertz of CPU, 256 gig of memory, and without reservation, and hit save, and then click assign and continue to move on to the next step, where I'm going to select the VM classes and the storage classes. So I'm going to be very consistent here and do the same thing. I'm going to use large, medium, and we'll go to the second page and use also small and extra small. And then on the storage class, and instead of the 2 terabytes here, we have a lot less storage available in the workload domain. So out of the 6 or 7 terabytes here, I'm just going to give them 1 terabyte in this US East region. And then I'm going to click assign and continue. And here we now have the Acme organization configured with region quotas. So if we go back now to the infrastructure overview, we see that the second step, which is creating organization, is checked and in the green. Next, we're going to use an IP space. This is an IP space which offers an approach for the providers to allocate IP addresses without info blocks, without any IP management software. And this allows us to allocate IP addresses to different organizations to enable connectivity to the external network. We can also use quotas here to control the usage of IPs and CIDR. So let's get started. We can either click start here, which will take us to the networking section and the IP space section directly and right into the workflow. So let's go ahead and click start. And this is going to give us what name do you want. Since I want to use this for the US West region first, I'm going to use US West -IP space. And this is going to be for the US West region. And this is again where I have this opportunity to define the dedicated IP block I want to use for the US West region when I'm allocating this to the Acme organization. So this is going to be the subnet 10.160.127.64/26. And then for the external reachability, we want to really reach everything. So we're going to do 0.0.0.0/0, which basically represents everything outside external to the organization, which could be the internet, for example. Next, we'll go into, and for the default quota, this is where we can allocate IP addresses to individual use to an IP space. So here I'm just going to set everything to unlimited, and there's no restrictions on the maximum subnet size. And I'm going to click OK. You can set the limitation on how many IPs they can use, how many CIDRs they can use, etc. And hit next. Once I'm ready, I can review all my settings and create the IP space. So we've created the IP space now for the US West region. Let's go ahead and create the one we want to use for the US East region. So US East, and we're going to select the US East region. And here the subnet for the IP space for the IP block is going to be 1.160.127.192/26. And then the external reachability is going to be the same, 0.0.0.0/0, which is everything. And then hit next. And for the default quota, we don't want any limitation on how many single IPs or CIDRs, and no restriction on the maximum subnet side, and hit next. We'll review and complete and hit create. Now that I have my IP spaces, we need to create a provider gateway. And the way we know, if we go back to the infrastructure overview, we see that the create IP space step is checked and in the green. And next I need to create a provider gateway. The provider gateway functionality is that it allows you to establish external network connectivity for organization. So the provider gateway is going to leverage VCF networking tier 0s or tier 0 VRFs and associate those with the IP addresses we just created in both regions. And then those IP addresses will be advertised from their gateway in the edge clusters in each of those domains. And then the provider gateway here can be assigned to one or more organization, as we will see in the step number 5. Let's go ahead and create our provider gateway for both regions. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create one first for the US West region and call this provider gateway. And select US West here and hit OK. We're going to see the tier 0 in the US West, and then hit next. We're going to see the IP space that we've created in the region that uses the external IP block 10.160.127.64, and we'll hit next and then create this US West provider gateway. Now this provider gateway is available to us, so we can allocate that to the organization. We're going to repeat the same thing, and now for US East. And we're going to select our US East region here. This will take us to the tier 0 of the workload domain instead. And we're going to see the US East associated IP block that we've created, which is 10.160.127.192/26. And then review and complete and hit create. Now I have 2 provider gateways that I can use to allocate to my organization. I'll do one thing here and go to the US West, and actually, just so we can stay consistent, we'll call this provider gateway. All right. So if we go back to our gateways, we have a US East provider gateway and we have a US West provider gateway. The US East is using the tier 0 of the workload domain, and then the US West provider gateway is using the tier 0 of the management domain in the respected regions. If we now go to the infrastructure overview, we see the provider gateway step is checked and in the green. And the last thing we need to do now is regional networking setting defines which networking resources are available to an organization. So there's 2 ways of doing this. We can click start and it'll take us to the networking within the Acme organization, or we can go directly to the Acme organization, go to networking and configure our regional networking where it says here it has not been set up yet. The first thing we need to do is follow the yellow banner here that to configure regional networking, you must set up first a name for the Acme organization. The log name is a globally unique identifier that will be used for log on the backing of the network provider. So if you've configured your NSX appliances and edges to forward logs to VCF operations for logs, you can search for the word Acme and you can basically identify the logs for this backing network provider to be able to troubleshoot by looking at those logs. But the log name will allow you to filter on the logs that belongs to this Acme organization. Next, we need to do the regional networking. So now we have two provider gateways that we've configured. So we need to do this again, one for the US West region and one for the US East region. So we'll hit new and we'll select first US West. Next, we see the provider we've created in US West. So we'll select that. Next, we see the edge cluster. So here they have the option to use the edge cluster of the tier 0 provider gateway or specifically select one. This is good if you have one or more edge cluster that represents different use cases or functionality or connection or connectivity. So I'm just going to use the default here because at the end of the day, I only have one edge cluster in this region, so it's not going to make any difference. I'm going to hit next and create my first networking for region US West. So it gives it the name Acme US West. It says it's using the US West provider. Status is normal. Our VPC connectivity profile and IP usage is set as we configured it. And then we can repeat this and create one for US East. So we're going to go and select US East, hit next. We're going to see the US East provider gateway this time. And we're going to hit next. And again, we're going to select the edge cluster of the tier 0 provider gateway. I'm going to click next and click create to create the second regional networking. So what we just did is we allocated regional networking for both the regions, US East and US West, and allocated those networking settings to the Acme organization so the Acme organization can consume those networking resources. Next, we're going to go to first user. So now that we have an organization, when I want to hand the keys to the org admin, I have to at least create a first user, and then the org admin can decide to define their own identity providers and then import users from those identity providers. But to get them started, we'll create a built-in account called admin. We'll provide the password for this admin and we'll give this built-in account an org administrator. And then we can provide the credentials to the org admin. And now we have a built-in admin account that can be used to access the Acme organization. One more thing I want to do here is that in the settings, I want to enable the org admin to be able to create subscribed content libraries. So here I can edit and allow this organization to create subscribed content libraries. So when we come to the video where we talk about the content libraries, this will allow the org admin to create a content library that points to a published content library that they can subscribe to. So if you give them this, they will be able to do it. If you do not toggle this on and allow the organization, the org admin will only be able to create local content libraries and upload their own images manually. Now that we have configured everything, if we go back to the infrastructure overview, we see that the getting started step by step is at 100% and all the steps 1 to 5 have been configured. So now let's go ahead and test our organization portal. There's two ways we can access the organization portal: by going to the organization, clicking on the organization, and then launching the organization portal from the provider portal UI. We can see that the organization portal is loaded. And if we go into manage and govern, and click on the virtual private cloud, we see that there is a default VPC assigned for each of the regions. So we have a default VPC created for the US West region, and then a default VPC created for the US East region, and the same thing for connectivity profiles. If we go to the IP management section, we see all the different management IP blocks that was assigned in both US West and US East. And then if we click on regions under here, we see the 2 regions allocated to the organization. Now that the admin can log in himself, will be able to know what region has been allocated to the organization and how he can later break down and assign these resources: 50 gigahertz of CPU, 256 of memory, and a terabyte of storage in the US East region, and 2 terabytes in the US West region. Now that we went through all the steps, our organization is configured and ready for the org administrator to configure and to move on with the assignment of resources to their application teams. This concludes part 2 of the VCF Automation 9 video series. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.